Hey guys, Tech Rally here, and welcome to the third lesson of learning Vue. This is going to be part one of 2 lessons focused on learning about Vue directives. Directives are special HTML attributes that Vue gives you to apply special reactive behavior to the render DOM. You can identify a directive by looking for the V dash. Specifically for this lesson, we're going to be looking at 4 directives: vIf, velse, vshow, and v4. In the next lesson, we'll go over more directives like vmodel, vbind, von, and a little bit of shortcuts. The first directive that I want to go over is vIf. The vIf directive allows you to use conditionals to display or hide information to the user. It could be anything like a div container, buttons, forms, and much more. Let's look at an example. I've already created the same folder structure as lesson 2, so I would highly recommend doing the same template and JavaScript file for this lesson. Like the lesson before, I'm going to be using the root element called app_vue. Inside of the app_vue div container is where all my directive logic will be. So let's start on the directive vIf. For display purposes, I'll use a header tag to kind of separate how each directive logic works. So in the beginning, I'll just create an empty container, h4 vIf, and then we'll create another separate container called h4 vshow, and then separate container here called v4. And then actually in here we'll just say velse as well. And this is just plain HTML. Now let's go back to our JavaScript code, and it's just like an empty file, but we, like the lesson before, we need to create a Vue instance. And now we do that by creating a new Vue, and then we create an L key and point it to the ID of the root element, which is app_vue, and then we'll add more data to our instance, and here we'll return some kind of data set. So for our purpose and example, I'll create a variable called if_boolean and set it to true. Now I go back to the index.html, and basically this is where I will be kind of showing you how the vIf directive works. So if I do div and then showing information via vIf. So if I run the server right now, what's being shown is plain old HTML. It just shows the text that says show information via vIf. But what if we attach a directive, specifically vIf? I want to target this container that has the text show information via vIf. So let's say vIf equals if boolean. What this is now doing is, if the if boolean variable is true, then show the content inside of it. And just to recap, in app.js, if boolean is set to true. So when we look at the data, when we look at the rendered output, nothing has really changed. But if we go back to app.js and set that if boolean value to false, it now says if boolean is false, then don't show this data, which is kind of like how it's being shown right here. We could take it even one step further and say, if you're false, then I want to show some other data. You could do another div and attach a velse to that same exact variable. So show information via velse. Now if I look back at the rendered output, it's showing the data since the original conditional fails. To recap, velse can be applied in response to a vIf. When a vIf condition is not satisfied, you can apply a velse condition to display something else. The next directive I want to go over is vshow. A vshow allows you to use conditionals to display or hide information to the user. If the condition is not satisfied, the element will be hidden but remain in the DOM. This can be possibly more performant. Let's look at an example. In the app.js, we'll add another variable called ifshow, or we'll call it show boolean, and we'll set it to true. In the index.html, let's just do all of our vshow directives inside of here. So let's create another div, and then show information via vshow, and then we'll attach a vshow to the show boolean. So basically, if we go back here, then yes, the show information via vshow will show up. And then if we set the show boolean to false, then no content will be show up. So what's the biggest difference between a Vif and a Vshow? Let's take a look. If I set the if I remove the velse content and then look and do an inspection on Vif and Vshow. Let's open this up a little bit. Specifically right here, we have a div app view, we have the div if. You can see that the Vshow is actually hiding the information from the user using using inline styling called display none. But in contrary, the Vif is actually removing it from the DOM itself. So in the case that you need to keep navigating back and forth and toggling back and forth certain data sets, and you know that you're going to be doing often, it actually might be better to use a Vshow instead of a Vif, because when you're adding and removing elements into the DOM, it could get very expensive. The next directive I want to go over is the v4. It's used to render a list of data or content to the user. And as a front-end developer where you're required to probably make a lot of API endpoint requests and just return a list of data sets, this will be essential for displaying data to your user. In terms of usage, it's very similar to how you would use a for loop in JavaScript. Let's take a look at the example. So here, we have the div with the h4 of v4, but let's actually go into the app.js and create maybe like an array of items. So here, I'm just going to call it maybe something like fruits. And in the fruits, there could be an apple, pears, oranges, and then I think that should be fine. Cool. So now this Vue instance has a data set called fruits. And inside of this specific div, I want to show apple, pears, and oranges as a list. So we'll create an unordered list. And then technically, what we really want to do if it was regular plain old HTML would be something like apple, pears, oranges. But obviously we can't do this when we're making endpoint requests and getting data from like a server, because this is just strict HTML. So to account for this, Vue provides us with the v4 directive. So what instead we could do is now attach a v4 and add some content inside of these quotations. So in our case, we're gonna say v4 equals fruit in fruits, and fruits is actually coming from the app.js that we've defined in the data set. And fruit is just a random variable name that I decided to do, but you could call it whatever you want. You could call it my fruits or fruity, or just, but for the lesson purposes, I kind of wanted to just focus on kind of creating a singular and like a plural version of it. And in the li itself, we could say, you could render the data by saying fruit. So if we look at the list on the v4, it comes out apples, pears, and oranges. In summary, if a Vif condition is satisfied, then it will show the content. If it is not satisfied, then it will remove the content. If you attach a velse to a Vif, then it provides you an alternative data rendering option. A Vshow is similar to a Vif in that it will show content if it's set to true. But if it's set to false, then it will hide the content and not necessarily remove it. A v4 is a great directive used for looping over data sets. And how you actually attach that to a specific element is by adding the v4 equal fruit in fruits. And then, like our example previously, it will be rendering out apple, pear, and oranges. There you go. We just went over a couple of directives like Vif and v4. I didn't want to go too long on this lesson, so the next one will go over some other key directives that I think you would use when writing code in Vue.js. I'll see you next time.